Namaste, Dandavat Pranam. By the instruction and grace of our spiritual master on Sripad Paramahamsa, Sripad Bhakti Madhava Puri Maharaj, we are here reading Srimad Bhagavatam. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Canto 4, The Creation of the Fourth Order, Chapter 9, Text 12.
Hare Krishna 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 Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Dandavat Prabhu.
Dandavad.
Tenhas Marantyaditaram Priyam Isham Hartyam Yechan Padashuta Shrid Grihavitadhara Yetvabjanha Bhavadiya Padharavinda Shogandhya Lobdha Hridyeshu Krita Prashangaha. O Lord, who has a lotus navel, if a person happens to associate with a devotee whose heart always hankers after your lotus feet, seeking always their fragrance, he is never attached to the material body or in a bodily relationship to offspring, friends, home, wealth, and wife, which are very, very dear to materialistic persons. Indeed, he does not care for them. Purport. A special advantage in devotional service is that devotees not only enjoy the transcendental pastimes of the Lord by hearing and chanting and glorifying them, but also are not very much attached to their bodies, unlike the yogis who are too attached to the body and who think that by performing bodily gymnastic exercises, they will advance in spiritual consciousness. Yogis are generally not very much interested in devotional service. They want to regulate the breathing process. This is simply a bodily concern. Here, Dhruva Maharaj plainly says that a devotee has no more bodily interest. He knows that he is not the body. Therefore, from the very beginning, without wasting time in bodily exercises, a devotee searches out a pure devotee, and simply by his association becomes more advanced in spiritual consciousness than any yogi. Because a devotee knows that he is not the body, he is never affected by bodily happiness or distress. He is not interested in bodily relationships with wife, children, home, bank balance, etc., or in the distress and happiness which come from these things. This is the special advantage of being a devotee. This status of life is possible only when a person is interested in associating with a pure devotee, who always enjoys the fragrance of the lotus feet of the Lord. Text 13. Tiryanagad Vija Sarshripad Devadaitya Martyadi Bi Parichitam Sad Asad Vishesham Rupam Stavistam Ajate Mahad Adhyanikam Natha Param Parama Vedmi Nayatra Badha. My dear Lord, O Supreme Unborn, I know that the different varieties of living entities, such as animals, trees, birds, reptiles, demigods, and human beings, are spread throughout the universe, which is caused by the total material energy. And I know that they are sometimes manifest and sometimes unmanifest. But I have never experienced the supreme form I behold as I see you now. Now all kinds of methods of theorizing have come to an end. Purport. In the Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says that he has spread himself throughout the universe. But although everything is resting upon him, he is aloof. The same concept is expressed here by Dhruva Maharaj. He states that before seeing the transcendental form of the Lord, he had experienced only the varieties of material forms, which are counted at 8,400,000 species of aquatics, birds, beasts, etc. The fact is that unless one engages in the devotional service of the Lord, it is impossible to understand the ultimate form of the Lord, This is also confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 18.55, Bhaktimam Abhijanati. Factual understanding of the absolute truth, who is the Supreme Person, cannot be obtained by any process other than devotional service. Dhruva Maharaj here compares his previous state of understanding with the perfection of understanding in the presence of the Supreme Lord. The position of a living entity is to render service, unless he comes to the stage of appreciating the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He engages in the service of the various forms of trees, reptiles, animals, men, demigods, etc. One can experience that one man engages in the service of a dog, another serves plants and creepers, another the demigods, and another humanity, or his boss in the office. But no one is engaged in the service of Krishna. Aside from common men, every man, even men who are elevated in terms of spiritual understanding, are at the utmost engaged in the service of the Virat Roop, or unable to understand the ultimate form of the Lord. They worship voidism by meditation. Dhruva Maharaj had been blessed by the Supreme Lord. When the Lord touched his conch shell to Dhruva's forehead, real knowledge was revealed from within, and Dhruva could understand the Lord's transcendental form. Dhruva Maharaj here admits that not only was he ignorant, but by years he was only a child. It would not have been possible for an ignorant child to appreciate the supreme form of the Lord had he not been blessed by the Lord, who had touched his conch shell to Dhruva's forehead. Text 14. Kalpanta etad akilam jatarena grinam sithe pumansvadrig ananta shakastad anke yanhabi sindhuruha kanchana loka padma garbhe juman bhagavate pranatusmi tasmai. My dear Lord, at the end of each millennium, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Garbhodakshai Vishnu, dissolves everything manifested within the universe into his belly. He lies down on the lap of Seshanag, and from his navel sprouts a golden lotus flower on a stem, and on that lotus, Lord Brahma is created. I can understand that you are the Supreme Godhead. I therefore offer my respectful obeisances unto you. Purport. Dhruva Maharaj's understanding of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is complete. In the Vedas, it is said, Yasmin Vigyate Sarvam Evam Vigyatam Bhavati. Knowledge received through the transcendental, causeless mercy of the Lord is so perfect that by that knowledge the devotees become acquainted with all the different manifestations of the Lord. Lord Kshirodakshai Vishnu was present before Dhruva Maharaj, who could also understand the Lord's two other forms, namely Garbhodakshai Vishnu and Karanadakshai Vishnu, or Mahavishnu. Regarding Mahavishnu, it is stated in Brahma Samhita 5.48, Yasyaika Nishpasita Kala Matavalamya Jivanti Loma Vilaja Jagadhandanata Vishnur Mahansa Ihayasya Kalabhishesho Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami. At the end of each and every millennium, when all the material worlds are dissolved, everything enters the body of Garbhodakshai Vishnu, who is lying on the lap of Seshanag, another form of the Lord. Those who are not devotees cannot understand the different forms of Vishnu and their positions in regard to the creation. Sometimes the atheists argue, how can a flower stem sprout from the navel of Garbhodakshai Vishnu? They consider all the statements of the Shastras to be stories. As a result of their inexperience in the absolute truth and their reluctance to accept authority, they become more and more atheistic. They cannot understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But a devotee like Dhruva Maharaj, by the grace of the Lord, knows all the manifestations of the Lord and their different positions. It is said that anyone who has even a little of the Lord's grace can understand his glories. Others may go on speculating on the absolute truth, but they will always be unable to understand the Lord. In other words, unless one comes in contact with a devotee, it is not possible to understand the transcendental form or the spiritual world and its transcendental activities. Text 15. Nitya parishuddha vibudha atma kutasta adi purusho bhagavam stradhisha yadbhujya vastitim akanditaya svadrishtya drastastitav adhimako vyatirti asehe. My Lord, by your unbroken, transcendental glance, you are the supreme witness of all stages of intellectual activities. You are eternally liberated. Your existence is situated in pure goodness, and you are existent in the Supersoul without change. You are the original personality of Godhead, full with six opulences, and you are eternally the master of the three modes of material nature. Thus, you are always different from the ordinary living entities. As Lord Vishnu, you maintain all the affairs of the entire universe, and yet you stand aloof and are the enjoyer of the results of all sacrifices. Purport. An atheistic argument against the supremacy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead states that if God, the Supreme Person, appears and disappears and sleeps and awakens, then what is the difference between God and the living entity? Dhruva Maharaj is carefully distinguishing the existence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead from that of the living entities. He points out the following differences. The Lord is eternally liberated. Whenever he appears, even within this material world, he is never entangled by the three modes of material nature. He is therefore known as Trihadisha, the master of the three modes of material nature. In Bhagavad Gita 7.14, it is said, Daivi Hyesha Gunam Mahi Mamha Maya Duratyaya. The living entities are all entangled in the three modes of material nature. The external energy of the Lord is very strong, but the Lord, as the master of the three modes of material nature, is ever liberated from the action and reaction of those modes. He is therefore uncontaminated, as stated in the Ishopanishad. The contamination of the material world does not affect the Supreme Godhead. Krishna therefore says in Bhagavad Gita that those who are rascals and fools think of him as an ordinary human being, not knowing his param bhavam. Param bhavam refers to his being always transcendentally situated. Material contamination cannot affect him. Another difference between the Lord and the living entity is that a living entity is always in darkness. Even though he may be situated in the mode of goodness, there are still so many things which are unknown to him. But it is not the same for the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He knows past, present, and future, and everything that is happening in everyone's heart. Bhagavad Gita confirms this. Vedham Samaktitani. The Lord is not part of the soul. He is the unchangeable Supreme Soul, and the living entities are his parts and parcels. The living entity is forced to appear in this material world under the direction of Daiva Maya. But when the Lord appears, he comes by his own internal potency, Atma Maya. Besides that, a living entity is within the time of past, present, and future. His life has a beginning, a birth, and in the conditioned state, his life ends with death. But the Lord is Adi Purusha, the original person. In Brahma Samhita, Lord Brahma offers his respectful prayers to the Adi Purusha, Govinda, the original person, who has no beginning, whereas the creation of this material world has a beginning. The Vedanta says, Janmadasyata, everything is born from the Supreme, but the Supreme has no birth. He has all the six opulences in full, and beyond comparison, he is the master of material nature. His intelligence is not broken under any circumstance, and he stands aloof, although he is the maintainer of the whole creation. As stated in the Vedas, in the Katha Upanishad 2.2.13, Nityo Nityanam Chaitanas Chaitanam. Nityo Nityanam Chaitanas Chaitananam. The Lord is the supreme maintainer. Living entities are meant to serve him by offering sacrifices, for he is the rightful enjoyer of the results of all sacrifices. Therefore, everyone should engage himself in the devotional service of the Lord with his life, his riches, his intelligence, and his words. This is the original constitutional position of the living entities. One should never compare the sleeping of an ordinary living entity to the sleeping of the Supreme Personality of Godhead in the causal ocean. There is no stage at which the living entity can compare to the Supreme Person. The Mayavadi philosophers, being unable to adjust to all this, come to the conclusion of impersonalism or voidism. And thus ends our reading for today. We'll continue from text 16 on Monday. Are there any comments or questions from the assembled devotees? Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Sripad Bhakti Madhava Puri Maharaj Ki Jai.
Jai.
Jai Srila Prabhupada, Srila Guru Maharaj, Srila Guru Dev, Srila Acharya Dev, Srila Shanta Maharaj Ki Jai.
Jai.
Jai Rupanuga Guru Varga Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the worldwide devotees. Sama Bhaktivedanta Vrinda Ki Jai. Jai Navadvip Dham Ki Jai. Nrsimhapali Dham Ki Jai. Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai. Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Ju Ki Jai.
Jai.
Shri Rath Yatra Parikram Ki Jai.
Jai.
Jai Giri Govardhan Gupta Govardhan Dham Ki Jai. Sham Kund Radha Kund Ki Jai. Tulsi Devi Bhakti Devi Vrinda Devi Ki Jai. Govardhan Gupta Govardhan Dham Ki Jai.
Jai.
Jai Princeton Bhaktivedanta Institute Ki Jai. Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Institute Ki Jai. Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Mat Ki Jai. Nitai Gaura Premanandi Hari 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 Bol. Jai Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Jai Sripad Ananda Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Sripad Krishna Keshava Prabhu Ki Jai.
Jai Gurudev. Dandavas Prabhu.
Dandavad.